We all love climbing grades, but the most controversial of climbing grade systems, without a shadow of doubt, is the E-grading system. People have been chased out of the country for mistakes and errors within grading this scale. Families aren't even talking over this sort of stuff. So what this needs is two very level-headed, considerate people to get to the bottom of this and work out what the E-grading system is all about. It's going to be controversial.
Definitely controversial.
I feel like at least you and me are going to upset some people here.
Yeah, and there's going to be streams and streams of comments.
The E-grade system, the very, very most basic, where does it start? Where does it finish? And like, what is it?
So the E-grades start at E1.
Yep.
And I would say they currently finish at E11. We have confirmed E11, and they potentially go to E12 because we've had a suggestion of E12.
Yeah.
So, but E1 to E11.
And it goes in whole numbers, E1, E2,
Two.
E3.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11.
Yeah, not like the American system of 5, 13 point,
No. Just 1, 2, 3, 4. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, okay.
Basic.
Yeah.
Real basic.
And it's for trad climbing only
It's for
in the UK.
British trad climbing only. So it's not for trad climbing. If I do a trad climb in Norway, I don't give it an E grade because they don't use the E grading system.
Yeah.
People have definitely been confused about that. E grade isn't a trad grade. E grade is a trad grade for the UK.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not for the Czech Republic. It's not for USA. It's not for. We don't use it anywhere else. We could do. That could be controversial.
Okay, so just to put in a little bit of controversy here straight away.
Yes.
What do you think about people when they use the E grade for trad climbs abroad and they give it an E grade? Is that just an absolute shambles? Is that a travesty?
No, they can do what they want. That's their own thing.
Oh, you do allow that?
Yeah, I mean, they can do what they want. It's just I'm not going to do that.
Oh, okay.
I'll just use the local system.
Okay. What's the difference at a very basic level between an E1 and an E10? Is it just E10 is shitloads harder than an E1? What gets us up that scale?
What gets you up that scale is everything to do with climbing. So we're looking at the physical difficulty. We're looking at how difficult it is to potentially get there, to access the quality of the rock, the danger of it, the general danger of it, how big the fall is, the tactics that you might take into it. Are we 3 pitches across a massive roof and it takes 2 days to get there? This is all factored in from 1 to 10 within that tiny little number.
In essence, for everyone watching, in an idealistic world, they should consider the E grade to be the most comprehensive, all-singing, all-encompassing description of a day out climbing.
Yeah, it's the day.
It includes everything.
It's the day.
So philosophically, this could be the greatest of all grading scales.
Yeah.
Except it's not.
No, because nobody can, Nobody can agree on it.
Okay.
No, there's no agreement on it because some people just think it's for one thing and some people think it's for this thing. Some people think it's for the whole day. Some people think it's for, I don't know. I don't even know what I think it's for, but now I've just said it, I think that's a great idea. It encompasses the whole day. It's like, okay, we're going for a day out climbing and this is my E grade for the day. It's like, yeah, perfect.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you that it sounds like it should be really good, but it does have some major downfalls. And it's why it gets argued about so much. And lots of people who don't come to the UK on a regular basis and they come and introduce themselves and climb on our routes on an E-grading system for the first time go, I don't get this. Because they look at the grading charts, don't they? And they read down them and they read off their relative French scale or like the French sport climbing scale or Australian sport scale or even a V grade that kind of can line up with your E grade in terms of bouldering ability. And it doesn't work because why? Why can you not just match up, for example, French 8A sport with E7 trad? Because those are where they line up on the route.
Yeah, in the kind of in the middle,
Yeah,
in the
why
mid-boundary.
why does this not actually work in reality?
I think it's because of all those other factors encompassed in there. And I think the biggest factor that we talk about, kind of neglecting your kind of day at the crag kind of thing, but the other biggest factor is how dangerous and how risky is this route.
I think as climbers who can comment on the E grade system, me and Pete have spent almost all of our climbing careers climbing E grades all around the UK and have got a good view on different rock types, different climbing styles, and how it works from first ascents to first repeats to something which is a trade route which has had like 500 ascents, and how that all works out. And I feel like when you've done that much climbing, the system does make sense. It's almost like a lifelong thing that you have to be immersed into for it to finally make sense. But before that, there's so many factors that go into building up an E grade that it's really hard to get a handle on how the little factors all play into the number that you get at the end, which is E5, E1, E10. And that's the hard thing to grasp, I think, because I could give you a scenario on paper and you could roughly ballpark how hard it would be
Yeah,
in theory,
yeah.
but it's so different, isn't it, once you actually go on the route and see what the experience is like.
Yeah. So maybe E is for experience.
Well, they have tried to say this in the past,
Yeah.
haven't they?
They have. But getting back onto the factor of
Okay.
how the things line up,
Yeah.
potentially, in a very, very basic way, we've got the physical difficulty mixed with the danger. If we just go for E5, because that's middle between 1 and 10, if we go for E5, if you have a hard E5, for it to be E5, it has to be a little bit safer. In general. And if you have an easy climbing, then in general, to get your E5 grade, then it has to be a little bit more dangerous than the other E5 for the easier climbing.
Yeah.
In general. So we're on that scale. So E5 can cover from your easy
Easy and bold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
to hard and safe.
Yeah.
And that equates for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's your kind of scale. In general, folks. In general.
So for each grade, you can kind of think of it as being like a seesaw or a balance. And you've got your grade here, whether it's E5, E9, E1. If you tip your balance in one direction for your E5, you've got the difficulty goes high here, but you've got the risk element goes really low. That still equals E5. If we tip that scale in the other direction, now we've got the risk factors really high, but the difficulty only will be a lot lower to achieve that same E grade. So it's like a balancing thing that you can move at any grade. It's so hard to explain how it works unless you get a little grading scale and explain to people that you need to factor in both this difficulty and this physical nature of the climb, and it's quite a broad window that you can apply those to. And that's where it's unique compared to any other grading scale in the world that I know of, which doesn't take into account the difficulty.
Yeah. You've got one number taking in a few factors, basically. And that it all packages into one number, which is why it's difficult. Because in all the other grading scales, we have one number which takes into consideration one thing, which is generally physical difficulty. And then a number afterwards, or a letter sometimes, which factors in the danger of it. Whereas we're packaging it all into one thing.
Yeah.
And that's why it's confusing.
Okay.
The E-grade system would benefit from some more information.
We do. We have the British Technical Grading System. So now we're opening a huge can of worms, which even like top level climbers don't even know how the British Technical Grading System works.
No.
Because it stops at 7A, we've scuppered ourselves.
I thought it had 7B in it now,
Oh, it maybe has 7B.
and
yeah.
7C.
So the British technical grading system, that starts at 4A and at the moment goes up to like 7B. But this technical grade afterwards has nothing to do with the sport grade, nothing to do with the French grade. So a technical grade of 6B is nothing to do with French 6B. Don't even try and equate them. It's nothing to do with it. What does it mean?
I know how to describe it.
What?
Okay, I've got it.
Yeah.
I think I've just solved the grading system. How to tell any visitor to the UK or someone who's coming up through the E-grade system what it means. The E number at the start, that represents the physical difficulty of the route combined with the danger aspect. That's what the E number results in. The technical grade afterwards.
Sorry, can I just stop you? Not the danger. I don't think we should say danger.
Ah, you don't?
No, I think we should say risk.
Okay.
Because danger is like a consequence, isn't it? Whereas risk is the level of that danger or consequence happening.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
You might have something that's snappy or sketchy or slabby or smeary, and the likelihood of that consequence or danger happening is actually a little bit more than if you had the same grade but it was very positive and a bit more physical.
Yeah.
So I think we should say risk rather than danger.
And this is a good point to make as well. So you have your E grade, which is a combination of the risk of the route and then the physical aspects of the route. How hard is it physically to get up it? Then your technical grade afterwards, I think, can be viewed as just a bouldering grade to describe
I agree.
the crux. It's just that we use this weird British bouldering grade that no one uses anywhere else in the world. And in a way, we could just say a route is E5 V3.
Yeah.
And people go, so physically it's in that 5 range and it's the combination of the risk and the physical nature of it overall. And then, the hardest sequence on it is about V3. That's what we have.
That's what it is. Interestingly, you say that because when I have graded my first ascents in the UK and I'm thinking up the British technical grade, I have a sheet or a scale which has the British technical grade and with a boulder grade next to it.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, and that's basically exactly what you've just said is how I've graded all my routes.
Okay.
And so I know that like British 7A, I don't know what they equate to now, but has like it's split into 3 boulder grades. So you have like an easy, medium, and hard 7A, and then 7B, easy, medium, and hard. And that's how I've split it.
Okay.
Because nobody's told me any otherwise, so I've just devised my own thing, and it seems to have worked.
No one's complained too much of your routes over the years.
So,
And anyway, no one understands it, so it's very hard to complain about it or
exactly.
or make comments on it, which is why there's so much debate and argument over this system.
yeah. Also with the technical grade, I've always seen it as like, I guess I've developed it as the hardest single set of moves, but some people actually see it as the single hardest move, which is why I think we've plateaued at 7A, because people go, 7A is like up to V10, and how can I ever do more than a V10 move on a route, a trad route? This is absolutely desperate. Whereas I've felt like I've done it more on a single set of moves, so the hardest boulder problem of the route rather than a move.
Yeah.
That's how I've always graded things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it has evolved that way over time now, and people see it as being a boulder problem.
A few moves, yeah, the hardest boulder problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we look at the controversy that we often see around the E grade, and there is a lot of it, where do you think are the real areas where this thing falls down and we have issues? And can we think about some specific examples of when problems have arisen or people have just misconstrued how the system works, whether it's in your own personal experience or things that you've seen in the news. So like, for example, for me, I feel like there's a really big misunderstanding around the loose rock, adventurous nature of climbing, and that people can go to some of the sea cliffs in the UK and find that they get relatively a very high E grade, even though the physical difficulty is quite low, and the rock is reasonably good rock, but it's very broken and unconsolidated. So you can just, both the gear and the holds potentially can fall off. And I think people don't quite grasp that that is a big factor which goes into it.
It's a factor.
Yeah.
Which is what I was saying with about like the risk rather than the danger.
But it falls down specifically, I think, in this case, and where you can get some controversy, where you have this really loose, very risky sea cliff climbing that might not be physically that difficult. But if someone takes a really prepared head point, do lots of top roping, lots and lots of laps on the route, they can essentially eliminate and try all of the holds and work out what falls off and what doesn't. And this really changes that experience if the general sort of ethos or philosophy of how people approach that climbing in that area has been on-site or ground-up climbing in that area. So the E grade is set under that kind of approach or ethic for the area.
Well,
when someone walks in and they change it and then it just messes everything up.
Yeah, and we have to remember that the E grade was established for an on-site.
Well, it was that as well, yeah.
Which is often forgotten because obviously on-site climbing is, like you say, like if you go down and check all the holds on something very loose, it's going to suddenly become a lot easier. And
especially if you deliberately pull holds off when you're top roping something because you're like, oh, that feels a bit sketchy, I'll just pull it off anyway.
Yeah, and then you can really inflate and get a higher E number by head pointing something like that at a much easier level. Yeah, it's interesting because the E grade is basically for an on-site, and that's how it was established. But I feel like in recent years it's developed into people obviously just taking the E grade, but they've done a lot of head pointing, and really we don't actually see any on-sites of E8. I don't think anybody's on-site at E9. Has E9 actually really been climbed?
Yeah, I think it's been flashed, hasn't it?
But it's for the E is for the on-site.
Yeah.
Has E9 been climbed? Tell me.
No.
Okay. So for the record, no.
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 E8 has been climbed, though.
E8 has been climbed. Yeah. Right, folks. Brewing jacket. It's getting a bit cold.
Right, where we've got to, folks, is we know it's a scale that goes from 1 to 10, except it doesn't. It goes to 12. We know it has a technical grade that represents the boulder problem, the hardest move, except it doesn't. It might be a sequence. And we also know that there's other factors that go into it, like the adventure, the quality of the rock, how much tact's involved with it, and risk. Pete, if you had to think about the 3 greatest E-grade shitstorms that have occurred in your lifetime, what are they?
The 3 greatest.
Yeah.
I think Parthian is a good one.
Parthian shot
Yeah.
on the gritstone.
On the gritstone, just because how it's evolved over time, and it was given E9. Is this flake going to hold? Ooh, the flake rips. We get a deck out. The grade changes. Nobody really knows what the grade is. People do it with side runners. There's some controversy around that. And then James comes back and does it like pure from the ground. I think that's like there's a story around there.
Okay, so that's 1.
Controversy.
Yeah, number 2.
2, I think, is probably like the one everybody knows, and the walk of life.
Yeah.
And James grading that, and then other people coming along and downgrading, and that was quite big.
Yeah.
That was big. That was definitely an E grade controversy.
Okay, number 2.
Number 2.
Can I suggest number 3?
Yeah, go on.
I think number 3 is the consistent, I think reasonably systemic undergrading by Dave McLeod in Scotland of his routes.
You think they're undergraded?
Yeah, I think they're undergraded.
Okay.
That's my suspicion on it.
But have
Having
you done any of them?
not gone on any of these routes.
No.
But what would an armchair debate be without having not gone on the routes? I mean, I've been on Walk of Life. In fact, I've done Walk of Life, and I haven't been on North Parthian Shot, so I can't talk about that one either.
Yeah.
Couldn't even talk about one of these things. Number 2.
Okay, going on to this.
Yeah.
Do we think there's compression in general? Because there was a big debate about compression in the E grades, and we had E9 established in the 80s with Johnny doing Indian Face, and that was the first E9. And 30 years later, we're at confirmed E11. So we've gone 2 grades in 30 years, whereas when we look at other scales, other grading scales, we've gone a lot more grades in those 30 years. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's compressed? Do you think there's compression in general? Not just in Scotland.
Not just in Scotland.
Not just
in
Scotland.
general.
In
the
general,
grade.
do you think there's compression?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's a problem for the grading scale. And it's something that some people have tried to address. Others just accept that it works that way and they move around it. And others have no idea that it occurs.
But, because I've got my own thoughts here, but why do you think there's compression? Do you think we have progressed further than E11?
I think we have, yeah. Yeah, we haven't progressed as far as I think we should have if all things had stayed steady in the way that the sport has evolved. Because, and what I mean by this is, I think over the last 30 years, there's been a movement away from riskier climbing, and people don't put as much time refining how they deal with risk, how they strategize around it, how they develop their mental skills around it. So I think it's like a sort of slightly blunted skill or tactic in the world's best climbers right now. So there's just not as much of it going on. But I also think that there's too much, it's almost like psychological fixation with E9 or 10 just being the top of the scale. And for whatever reason, people don't feel like they want to stick their neck out and move it on from that because it sounds too big. And then we've got a little bit stuck.
Yeah. I have a little bit of a thought on this.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm not sure, is that actually compression? Is the compression? I'm not sure, because E9, that was established in the 80s, and we've got an E9 which is, it gets E9 because it's very risky. It's high, it's at the peak of risk.
And this is Indian Face.
This is Indian Face in North Wales. I've never been on it or done it, but apparently it gets a 7B plus sport grade.
Just to confirm, we're talking about a route here that neither of us have been on.
Yeah, neither of us have been on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is all hypothetical.
Okay, that's good. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that, because we wouldn't want people thinking that we'd been on this route and we were talking about this route. Just like to baseline establish our arguing point.
Our arguing point of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that would be poor.
But from people who we've talked to who've done the route, we know that it's the upper end level of that risk factor, and this is why it gets the E9 grade.
Okay, so you've talked to someone who did this route somewhere in the past.
Yes. I don't think anybody's questioned the grade and said it's higher or lower. I think we can agree that this has been repeated quite a lot of times, and we're on E9 with this, and I feel like we can probably agree that it's at the riskier end of the scale because it's easier climbing. And that was established, so we know that got the grade of E9 because of the risk attached to it. It's slabby, a bit on-off, potentially. I don't know, not being on it.
So we heard.
So we heard. But to have huge progression up the E grades, what we're talking about in terms of this, like, we think it's compressed, we have to increase the physical difficulty, but keep that risk factor exactly the same as 1987,
Yep.
which is your 7B plus. And so to go to your E10, we have to have your sketchy 7C plus, and then your sketchy 8A plus, and then your sketchy 8B plus. And I just don't think we have had that level of progression, because what we've done is we've massively increased the physical difficulty of our climbing since the 80s, but we've massively decreased the risk that we're taking. And the risk that we're taking on the E11, which is established, let's say Rhapsody, and which is confirmed at E11, it's had many repeats, the risk is way lower. Way, way, way lower than it is on Indian Face. So I think we would have seen the big progression if we'd kept the risk factor the same. Because that, in 87, we were maxed out on risk factor. We maxed it out in 87. So we need to keep that maxed out if we're going to then progress the E grade. Because we've increased the physical difficulty, but we have to keep our 87 risk factor.
I like what you've done there with that
Yeah.
argument.
Yeah.
I think it's a nice move.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good move in the pub. I would have nodded along for a couple of minutes there.
Okay.
For a bit.
You did.
I did.
You did nod along.
And we're sat on a sofa in a really cold unit. And my tea's going cold.
Yeah. And you're wondering why.
Yes. But I feel like the progression of the E grades gets a bit bogged down if you think about the very, very most dangerous stuff, because it's quite absolute in the sense that if you cock it up, you're really, really in trouble. It's extremely serious if you fall off Indian Face. In fact, no one's ever fallen off Indian Face.
Yeah.
It's that dangerous. But if we nudge it back down a little bit
Nudging.
and say, now it's pretty freaking spicy, and you might take some very long falls or rip some gear, and you're going to feel really quite nervous. You're going to be mentally very strong for it. You still don't need that high a sport grade to get into your upper end of your E grade for the difficulty.
No, you don't.
And that's the bit where I feel like we have had the progression in terms of the ability of the sport grade.
We've had
Because
huge
it-
progression in the sport grade.
Yeah, and that's
big
That's where I think
progression.
it's got progress. I think that's where it's got compressed. Is actually more in the spicy but hard climbing.
That's where it's compressed.
Yeah. So there's not compression across the whole thing. I think it's
It's within a certain element of it.
Yeah. Because it's the most workable one.
Yeah.
And where people have got the ability to be able to move on. Yeah, I'd say that's my view on it.
Yeah.
Can we describe what an E12 would actually look and feel like? If people watching, if we said, okay, you'd be doing this difficulty of climbing into this amount of climbing with this amount of risk, do you reckon we can build a workable hypothetical example?
So, if I was grading, I would compare back to routes that are at the lower end. Not lower end, not E1. I would compare back to routes that are at the notch below. So your E11s.
Yeah.
And if we take our confirmed one, Rhapsody, we have your 8C climbing, it's very sustained. We take a big lob off the top, and I think, we've kind of had some sprained ankles and stuff like that. So we have to be, if we're taking that kind of level again, it has to be like 8C plus 9A standard of climbing with those same consequences of Rhapsody. Probably 9A really.
Okay.
For you to get to E12.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what we're looking at.
Okay.
That's probably not very good for people, is
So
it?
people are going to think, I've got to climb a 9A difficulty of sport route, and it's going to have an absolutely massive lob on it, but you're probably not going to get injured. A massive lob means a very large mega whip.
Yeah.
Is that
It's a big
international
whip.
speak
Big whip.
for big lob?
Big whip, big lob.
Mega whip.
Mega whip.
Yeah.
Mega whip equals big lob.
Yeah. Equals trouser filler.
I like where you've done that.
So the last route that I feel has had quite a lot of controversy around it was Walk of Life, which is this amazing looking slab route down the south coast of the UK, which was made the first ascent by James Pearson. And he gave this thing E12, which was at the time the hardest E grade that existed anywhere in the UK. So it was right at the cutting edge. But very quickly, what happened was it had a couple of repeat ascents, and the repeat ascensionists suggested a really big downgrading of this route from E12 to E9, which people love a bit of gossip. Everyone loves a good downgrade, and especially if it's quite a few numbers. So this really kind of got the media riled up. There was a lot of chat around, was the E12 realistic in the first place? Were the new grades proposed correct? Etc., etc. And I think with that one, it was a circumstance where you've got someone who didn't have loads of experience on a very particular style of climbing, getting outside of their own grading experience range, not their own climbing experience range. And so there was a mismatch of that experience thing, the kind of the risk plus the atmosphere plus the strategy, the tactics involved with it, the overall experience, and being a bit misaligned with that versus some of the repeat ascensionists who had a lot more experience in that range. And I felt like when I did this route last year, so yeah, it was last year that I went and repeated it and spent some time on it and got to know it. I think with reflection, the E9 grade and downgrade was actually really unfair. And I think that it should have been downgraded to E10. But interestingly, what's happened subsequent to when James did it and I did it recently is the route has changed in nature because it's a sea cliff and more holds have appeared on it. Bits of, little triangles of rock have fallen out. And I think having watched the videos and sequences of James climbing it, there's very definitely additional holds on it nowadays compared to when James climbed on it. So I feel like as a repeat ascensionist, I would give James a fair E10 first ascent on that route, and that would have been spot on. The E9 downgrade, I think, was unfair, but the route is adjusted now, so I think E9, top end of it, is fair.
Interesting.
And that's where I sit with it now.
Yeah. At least you can actually talk from some experience there.
I know, unbelievable, isn't it?
That's the first one we've been able to speak from real life experience.
And it's probably completely wrong.
Do you think there will ever be a consensus on British trad grades and grading?
A consensus? No, there'll never be a consensus.
I don't think anybody will ever fully agree
No.
on it. And that's not just British trad grading, that's grading. Mm-hmm. Full stop. So no, there'll never be a consensus.
Are E-grades useful without a guidebook?
Are E-grades useful without a guidebook? Yes, they are definitely useful without a guidebook because you can see it's E10, and if you're an E5 climber, you're probably not going to go and bother trying it.
Yeah.
It gives you, like a grade does, it gives you direction of what to expect. And that's what I look at in a grade.
Yeah, definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
What do you prefer, British E-grades or the American system of trad grading?
I'm going to be controversial here and say that I much prefer the American trad grading system. And if I could use that system everywhere, I would use it. Yeah.
It's controversial.
Interesting.
Would you?
Yeah, I mean, it gives a good description of
No,
the
it
route. And it's
That's the thing. It does what you need, doesn't it?
That's what you need it to do.
And if you need to get a bit more context, just write it in the route description.
Yeah.
In the guidebook.
Yeah, it's not a bad system, that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think there will ever be an E13?
Will there ever be E13? I think there will definitely be E13. Yes. It won't be for some time still.
Yeah, I think E13 we're quite a long way off that because we only have a couple of E11s. We've got one proposed E12. We're only just sneaking into those grades. I think it's going to take a long time, not a long time, but a bit more time, 10, 20 years to kind of really get that 11, 12 really established before people can start pitching into 13. So the E grading scale is, what's the word?
Incredible.
No.
Exponential.
Exponential, yeah, it keeps going. No, not exponential.
Infinite.
Infinite. The E grading scale is infinite, so we can definitely get E13, but I don't think we're going to see it anytime soon.
Or you
Yeah.
should just quote Pete on saying that the E grading scale is exponential. That will really confuse everyone.
Which single climber do you think pushed E grades the furthest in their career?
Pushed E grades the furthest.
Ooh, I think it might be Johnny Dawes.
It could be. It could be Johnny, yeah.
I feel like it was Johnny. He was in that period where the numbers were going up quite a lot, and then he pushed it right to the quite difficult and very, very dangerous. It might have been the biggest jump.
I think so. Yeah, I'd agree with that actually.
Yeah, Johnny Dawes.
Because it was in that earlier period where they were kind of flying through those 7, 8, and then he eventually got to 9 at the peak. And we haven't progressed much since that.
Yeah, let's give it to
In
Johnny.
terms of number, I'll give it to Johnny.
Yeah.
I'll give it to Johnny.
Ledge. I suspect everyone else understands it, but we don't understand it now, having talked about it for so long. This is one of those things where the more you talk about it and the more you think about it, it's almost like the least you understand.
Yeah. What you really need to go and do is just go climbing.
I think that's
the answer.
That is the answer, isn't it?
That's probably the answer.
And every time we sit here and we're just talking on our armchairs, then we get lost. But if we just go climbing and go, yeah, that does feel about E5. Yeah, that does feel like E3. Yeah. And then it works again.
And then it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.